Okay. I actually addressed this very question when I gave a talk in front of a group of about 70 young scientists as part of something called the World Nuclear University, which I didn't know existed. But there were all these very young, brilliant nuclear engineers and economists who study the nuclear industry. And they had a notion to create all of these nuclear-powered desalination plants all over the place. And although you could argue that that's a great idea in places, let's say, where you have very specific needs for, let's say, municipal water supply or industrial water supply, most of the water usage that we're talking about has to do with irrigation water use, often in the centers of the continents, far away from the oceans. And I think if you are really going to solve the water question, you have to, in some sense, solve the irrigation question. And if you want to desalinate, and you do it at the coastline, somehow you got to get the water from where it's created into the mid-continents, which are often thousands of kilometers away. And it costs a lot of money and a lot of energy to pump that water any significant distance. So I think for specialized uses, it might actually be part of a solution. I'm not sure it's the most economically viable solution. It's expensive technology relative to, for example, conservation. And I just was delighted to see in the men's room that they have water-free urinals. My gosh, so we didn't use any water. And in my hotel room, I'm probably flushing 5 gallons each time I hit the button. So there are alternatives to these, let's say, hard path technologies. But it could be part of the puzzle in specific locations. I would admit to that. I don't know, your view on this.
Well, every situation is local. And again, I think it comes down to looking at the facts. And we tend to look at these things as silver bullets or magic beans, that all of a sudden we have a solution. But it's incredibly energy intensive. There are many, many studies that show the pros and cons. Again, some pros in very dry areas if you have a lot of energy, but then your carbon footprint goes way up. So again, there's other low-hanging fruit in conservation and also development. I mean, that's another big issue with water is land use. We have to be aware from our township level all the way up to the federal level as to what our water demands are going to be.
Just to tie the last two questions together, do either of you want to comment on the heavy use of water for irrigation and the need for conservation and perhaps the level of subsidy that we provide for irrigation?
Take that? Subsidy?
A softball.
A softball for subsidy. Sounds like a campaign. Well, I'll give a softball answer. We've got to get all the facts on the table, and we have to face them. I think we have, when we look at the whole water issue as a challenge, part of it, we don't have the imagination or, in one of the earlier sessions, even the will to look at the problem. We already talked a bit about corn and just the huge impacts. And I think we have to be looking at the full footprint.
Yeah, the map that I showed of those red areas where there's an overusage of water, in many parts of the world, that has to do with entrenched thinking about food security, national food security. And if you're in a place like Jordan and you want to have food security, you are irrigating the heck out of your croplands. If you're doing this in Saudi Arabia, you're irrigating lots of your cropland, and you're depleting your aquifers, and it's clearly non-sustainable. And so why bother subsidizing it if there are alternatives? One alternative is to try to optimize international trade in these crops. And for example, if Brazil is exporting soybeans, why bother growing soybeans in a desertic area yourself? It just doesn't make any sense.